to another episode of Poly Talks, and today we'll be continuing our hypothetical prediction series with a matchup between Nikki Haley of South Carolina and Joe Biden of Delaware. Now, this is an interesting matchup as it would be kind of an inverse of 2016 in that Republicans are nominating a female candidate and Democrats are nominating a male candidate. And I'd say, in terms of electability, Nikki Haley falls somewhere between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, so she's more electable than Trump, and certainly has not even close to as much baggage, although she isn't really as inspiring and kind of evocative as Ron DeSantis, so I don't think she would fare quite as well in an election. And we saw last time how Ron DeSantis only barely managed to defeat Biden in such a scenario. So today we'll just go straight into it, and I would say that while I don't have polls right now, there I would assume that Joe Biden would be leaning in most of them, as polls do tend to skew a little Democratic. So just keep that in mind. Although certainly I think tend to be a proponent of the belief that a state by state review is much more important than a national polling sense, which I think has a limited scope and can't tell us as much. So, first, we'll start with safe states. And I just want to say that this prediction will be more focused on the likelihood of states. So, I'm not going to bother too much with safe versus likely or anything like that, because I don't think ultimately it makes a massive difference as long as it's widely expected to go to a certain political party. As far as I can tell, then that's a safe state for me, even if it's not safe in terms of that is the wrong district there. Even if it's not safe in terms of margin, perhaps a state like Colorado, I'd say I will be characterizing it as such today. But if I'm not quite as on point today, that's the reason why. So so we've got Montana in the north, South Dakota, of course, South Carolina, her home state, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, Arizona. Certainly not Georgia, although we'll discuss that because of her southern influence. Sorry, Kansas. Now, I think Utah, I'm just going to characterize it now, will go likely this election. It has been trending a little more Democratic recently, so fascinating to see how it goes there. So, of course, a lot of red on the map at this point. Of course, that's in no way indicative of how the Electoral College will go. Understand the principle: land does not vote, people do. So, I think we've got close to the safe states we want to characterize here. So now we'll move on to Democratic likelies. That is Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico, states that effectively are safe or close to safe, but just I don't expect them to go so by a large safe margin, which is 15 plus points. So, Minnesota, I'm going to characterize as likely. That could change by the time of the election, but it would take a lot, I think. And I'm actually going to go with New Hampshire. It might be a little controversial, but I don't think Nikki Haley is the type of person to really appeal in New Hampshire. And frankly, I think that state has been going Democratic. I could characterize it as lean, but in terms of probability, I'm going to say likely. I don't really see I keep getting Kristi Noem and Nikki Haley confused. But anyways, Nikki Haley, I don't really see her winning in the New Hampshire. So that concludes it for Democratic likelies. And Republican, we have a big one, which is Texas. I do think this is quite a likelihood. I think she has an influence in Texas. Maybe she wouldn't do as well as other Republicans, but I think it will still be between 5 and 15 points. Florida, well, not directly from there, which is actually the first Republican candidate we've discussed, not directly from Florida. However, I still expect she'll win it by a likely margin, just seeing where Florida has been trending recently. And Ohio, same thing, same story. Iowa, and most of the districts of Maine, if I can get these right. Yes, there we go. And of course, Maine at large, or Nebraska, sorry. Maine is the other one. I'm going to say Maine's second district is likely. I think it went to Trump both times quite significantly, so I don't think it's much of a target for Democrats, but I think Maine at large is likely for them. And already we can see that even now we are at a 216 to 203 electoral vote matchup, and that's quickly turned to 219 to 203 after I've included Alaska. But certainly, these states are going to decide it, and the election is certainly, I think, a very, very close to a toss up here. So I'm straight up going to start with Michigan going to Democrats. I think this is by far the most likely scenario, but I think it's certainly not a huge stretch to see Nikki Haley winning here. I just think at the current rate we're going, having won it uh, in 2020, and Democrats doing well there recently, I think that's one of the more likely Democratic states here. So that's a good position for Democrats. Illinois, I was tempted to put it at lean, but I'm gonna put it at likely just because actually I think lean would be a poor characterization. I think Illinois is likely for the new future. So that's 237 already, a boost to Democrats. Before we continue, though, I'm gonna go ahead and characterize North Carolina as well. I mean, it's a state bordering hers that has been not necessarily trending Republican, but kind of stubbornly refusing to budge, and we've seen it just go to Republican time and time again. So I don't think Joe Biden has much of a chance there, but I think, as usual, it will be a likely margin. Now, in terms of other states, we've got a very close electoral college matchup, and the first one I'll characterize for Democrats is Pennsylvania. So, similarly to Michigan, I think this one is perhaps a little more competitive, but still on the Democrat leaning side. After all, it's where Joe Biden grew up, Scranton, Pennsylvania, and it's kind of the heart of his blue wall, white collar, working class voters strategy that kind of propelled him to victory in 2020. And that's, I think, an indication of how he does well. That is the region of the country he does best in, which is why he's chosen to campaign there on multiple occasions. And Kristi Noem is really more of a southern, Texas to Florida to the Carolinas type appeal. So I find it difficult to believe that she'll be able to capture Pennsylvania, but it's certainly not a foregone conclusion. And we are so nearly done here, but I'll first characterize Nevada also is going to Democrats. Again, just especially on the presidential level, it's just shown to be so consistent in Democrats. I honestly think the 2016 performance was awful for Democrats, and they still managed to win Nevada by essentially the same margin as they did in 2020. I think it's a very rigid state, and it certainly can change depending on who Nikki Haley chooses to target, but I don't think Nevada will be one of those, especially as it's only 6 electoral votes. And let me characterize DC right here. So we are oh so close, oh so very close. And so to move on, we will characterize one state for Nikki Haley that I think is actually probably a major surprise to many of you, and that is Georgia. I think this will be the main state that Nikki Haley will target in her campaign. I think she's got that southern type appeal. Again, her state is bordering it, and I think this just might be the election Nikki Haley is able to turn the tide in Georgia, and it might be the last time the Republicans are able to win in Georgia on the presidential level, or the last 2 election cycles have been somewhat of a fluke, and perhaps we shouldn't be too confident to call Georgia a blue shifting state, but that will all be decided by this election. But I do think Nikki Haley will just eke out a win here. It could be extremely close, it could go either way, but that's just what I'm saying because of her kind of area and region of influence, just in the same way as Ron DeSantis had influence there. So now we've got 2 more states, and Nikki Haley needs to win both of them to win the election. But I do not see that as happening because I'm just going to straight up and say It's a difficult choice for me, but I'm going to say Arizona's just ever so slightly lean blue. I think Nikki Haley does have kind of an appeal there in the Sunbelt region, but ultimately, I think this state has actually shown very promising signs for Democrats recently, and it's actually quite interesting looking at the 2022 elections. The both houses of the delegates nearly flipped. There was a Democratic governor elected, barely. There was a Democrat attorney general elected. Of course, the re-election of Mark Kelly, and really, what we've just seen is Democrats kind of swept the board in Arizona, and they did not. There was a few elections they didn't win, statewide elections, but ultimately they did very well in 2022, and that was a very difficult year for them. So I certainly think that Joe Biden's got the advantage coming into 2024. So of course this would win the election for him, but we still got one final state, which is Wisconsin. And this one, if you notice, was in my Republican column in my Ron DeSantis versus Joe Biden video, and the reason was I think Ron DeSantis is just such an inspiring figure for Republicans that I think it would be able enough to kind of draw Wisconsin, which has kind of been teetering on the brink the past few years, to the Republican column. But like I said, I think Nikki Haley just doesn't have that kind of raw influence and appeal that Ron DeSantis has. So I think Joe Biden will win this, maybe by a tilt margin, if I'm being generous here, to Nikki Haley. And so this is a relatively confident electoral win for Joe Biden. And I think if he is to win, he's definitely going to pursue it via this region here, the Rust Belt, because if you noticed, he can afford to lose Arizona, and actually, he is actually, what am I missing here? Oh, interesting. So I'm missing Nebraska's second district, which I think is a lean Democrat district based on how it's gone. So actually, assuming that Joe Biden's able to win the Nebraska's second district, which funnily enough can decide the election outcome, he can actually afford to lose Nevada and Arizona as long as he and Georgia, as long as he wins this Rust Belt region here. So obviously there are a lot of unknowns in this scenario, but it just speaks to the testament. The Rust Belt is a very powerful region that really can determine this election. I just think Joe Biden will do better there, frankly. So that's why I've chosen to go the way I do. And this is a another fascinating election, and it is a win for Democrats, but it's certainly one that I could see changing either way, and it's more competitive than Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. So that's that. Thank you for tuning into this hypothetical prediction. And like I've said before, 1.5 years, if not more, before the election. This is all a bit for academic purposes. This isn't supposed to be a major or definitive kind of prediction here that I really truly stand by, because this is going to change heavily by the time of the election. If not, at least there will be many events that kind of influence its progression. So that's all for today. I will see you in another Polytalks episode very soon, and that will conclude our hypothetical matchup series for the near future, but certainly there will be some in the future. Just stay tuned for those. And although I will be shifting to more environmental content a little bit sooner just to give an update, so pardon my ramblings, and that is the end of today's video. Thank you.